Jasmine Paolini just beat Alex Eala at Wimbledon, and the very first thing she did was turn and thank Roger Federer, right there on center court in front of thousands. It wasn't planned, it wasn't scripted, and it instantly became the moment everyone was talking about. But to understand why this single thank you hit so hard, you have to go back to where this story actually started, with a giant killer from the Philippines, a fading former finalist, and a legend who almost didn't need to say a word. To understand what happened on center court, you have to rewind just a few days. Alexandra Eala was not supposed to be the story of this Wimbledon. At 21 years old, ranked outside the world's elite, she arrived in London as a name casual fans barely recognized. But something shifted in the third round. Eala walked onto the court against Iga Swiatek, the defending Wimbledon champion, one of the most dominant players of her generation, and she didn't just compete, she won. She ended Swiatek's title defense in one of the most stunning upsets of the tournament, and suddenly the tennis world had a new name to obsess over. Commentators scrambled to explain it. Fans across the Philippines flooded social media with pride. A left-handed 21-year-old underdog had just done what almost no one predicted, and for a few days it felt like Wimbledon belonged to her. On the other side of the draw stood a very different story. Jasmine Paolini, 30 years old, was supposed to be past her peak, or at least past her moment. 2 years earlier, she'd stood on this exact court in the Wimbledon final, falling in 3 sets to Barbora Krejcikova. She'd also reached the French Open final that same season, but since then her career had quietly stalled. She dropped out of the top 10, her form had been inconsistent. By the time she walked into this year's tournament, she carried a modest 11-12 record on tour and sat at 17th in the world. Nobody was writing her into the storyline. All the headlines belonged to Eala. So when the draw paired them together in the 4th round, it read like a changing of the guard match, the rising giant killer against the fading finalist. The story practically wrote itself, until one more name entered the picture. Roger Federer, the 8-time Wimbledon champion, the man many still call the King of Wimbledon, took a seat in the royal box that day, and whether anyone realized it yet, his presence was about to become the emotional center of everything that followed. Because for Paolini, Federer wasn't just a legend in the stands, he was, in her own words, her idol. And she was about to play the biggest match of her season with him watching her every move. The match itself became a battle of nerve as much as skill. Under a brutal sun, temperatures climbing toward 90 degrees Fahrenheit, one of the hottest days of the tournament, Paolini and Eala traded blows for over 2 hours. Paolini took the first set 6-4, showing the aggressive net play that had quietly carried her through the tournament. She'd already beaten Robin Montgomery, Victoria Glibic, and former top 5 player Maria Sakkari to get here. Something had clicked in her game again. But Eala wasn't finished making history. She leveled the match, breaking back to win the second set 4-6, forcing a decisive third. For a moment, it looked like the giant killer story might continue. The Philippines had a real chance at watching their rising star reach a Wimbledon quarterfinal. Here's where it got tense. In the third set, both players traded nerves as much as shots. Eala battled from break points down. Paolini, despite falling behind 0-3-0 at one stage, found the composure to close it out. In the 8th game of the decider, she converted the only break point of the entire set, the single moment that decided the match. She then had to serve out the win with the same steady focus that had carried her through 2 hours of pressure. Final score 6-4, 4-6, 6-3 in Paolini's favor. But the real tension of that day wasn't just the scoreline, it was what was happening in Paolini's head the entire time. She later admitted that the presence of Federer in the royal box was almost impossible to ignore. She said she kept repeating to herself during the match, "Please stay focused, trying not to think about the fact that he was there watching her every mistake. Imagine that. You're fighting for your Wimbledon quarterfinal against a player who just eliminated the defending champion. The heat is unbearable, the match is on a knife's edge, and the entire time, part of your mind is locked on the fact that your childhood idol is 15 feet away watching your every mistake. That kind of pressure breaks players. It didn't break Paolini, and the moment she closed out that final point, everything she'd been holding back came rushing out. When Paolini turned to the crowd for her on-court interview, nobody expected what came next. She wasn't asked about Eala, she wasn't asked to break down the third set breakpoint. Instead, the very first thing out of her mouth was directed somewhere else entirely, up toward the royal box. "I want to thank you, Roger Federer, because he's my idol," Paolini said, and the crowd erupted. Federer, sitting in the royal box, reportedly showed his appreciation right back. It wasn't a rehearsed line, it wasn't a sponsor shout-out. It was raw, unfiltered gratitude from a 30-year-old player who had spent her whole career watching this man dominate the very court she was now standing on. Paolini elaborated further, admitting that managing her focus had taken conscious effort throughout the match, and that the emotional weight of Federer's presence was difficult to shake. "I was watching all the finals in all the tournaments he played here," she said, explaining just how much his career had shaped her own relationship with this tournament. And here's what made the moment even bigger. This wasn't just a passing thank you tucked into a longer answer. It was the headline. Every outlet covering the match led with it. Not the scoreline, not Eala's fall, Federer's name, and Paolini's gratitude toward him. For a match that ended a breakout run and delivered a gritty three-set battle, the story that traveled fastest around the tennis world wasn't about tennis at all. It was about admiration and about a moment that felt more personal than professional. Social clips of the interview spread quickly. Fans zeroed in on Federer's reaction in the box, replaying it, dissecting his expression, debating what it meant that even in retirement, his presence alone could still shape a match. Because that's really what this was. Not Federer playing, not Federer coaching, just Federer sitting quietly in a box and somehow still becoming the center of the conversation. That's the strange magic of the man. He didn't hit a single ball and he still ended up trending. Every headline needs a counterweight, and here it's easy to forget the player standing on the other side of the net. When Paolini turned to thank Federer, Alex Eala's tournament didn't end in disgrace. It ended in heartbreak, yes, but also in history. Before this loss, she had already done something few expected of her. She had eliminated the defending Wimbledon champion. That result alone rewrote her season and put her name permanently into the conversation of players to watch. Yet in the moment right after the loss, the spotlight didn't stay with her. It swung almost instantly towards Federer's box and Paolini's emotional tribute. For a young player who had just fought through a grueling 2-hour three-set battle, one where she led at times, where she forced a decider, where she made Paolini dig deeper than she had all tournament, the narrative afterwards centered almost entirely on someone else's idol. That's the cruel arithmetic of sports storytelling. Sometimes the better story steals the spotlight from the better performance. It's worth sitting with that for a second. Eala's run, beating a defending champion, reaching the fourth round, pushing a former finalist to the brink, was, by any measure, one of the standout stories of the tournament, but it got overshadowed almost overnight by 6 words about a retired legend in a box seat. Is that fair? Maybe not, but it says everything about how much weight Federer's name still carries, even years removed from competing. His presence alone can rewrite what a match is remembered for. Meanwhile, for Paolini, the win came with its own layer of redemption. She wasn't just moving forward in the draw, she was proving something to herself, on the same court where she'd lost the biggest final of her career 2 years earlier. This wasn't a clean, easy story. It was 2 athletes colliding with 2 very different emotional stakes, and only one walked away with both the win and the spotlight. By the time the dust settled, the numbers told their own story. Paolini's win pushed her back up the rankings, climbing from 17th into the top 15 with a real chance to crack the top 10 again, depending on how deep she advances. It marked her first Grand Slam quarterfinal appearance since that same Wimbledon final run 2 years prior, a full-circle moment, returning to the exact stage where her career had peaked and then quietly faded. She had arrived in London without much fanfare, having failed to win consecutive matches since March and accumulated just 4 wins in her previous 10 appearances. Nobody was calling her a contender, and yet here she was, grinding through Montgomery, Golubic, Sakari, and now Eala, rebuilding her season one match at a time in front of the one man whose career had shaped her love of this exact tournament. For Eala, the tournament ended, but not her story. She leaves Wimbledon with a signature win over a defending champion and a performance against Paolini that proved she belongs in these matches, not just capable of an occasional upset. The heartbreak of this loss doesn't erase that. If anything, it raises the stakes for what comes next in her career, because now the tennis world knows her name, and they'll be watching every tournament after this one differently. And then there's the twist nobody predicted when the day began. The emotional through line of the entire afternoon wasn't a rivalry between two players. It was a legend sitting quietly in the box, who didn't need to lift a racket to become the headline. Federer's presence turned a routine fourth-round result into a moment people will still be replaying long after this Wimbledon ends. That's rare in professional tennis, rare in professional sports, period. And it's exactly why this moment traveled as far as it did, because it wasn't manufactured for cameras. It was real gratitude, spilling out in real time from someone who never stopped being a fan, even while becoming a champion herself. Meanwhile, Eala's chapter in this story isn't a footnote, it's a beginning. A 21-year-old who took down a defending champion and pushed a former finalist to 3 tense sets doesn't fade quietly into the background. She'll be back, and next time the spotlight might not have anywhere else to go. And Federer? He didn't play a single point in this Wimbledon, and somehow he still became one of its defining stories. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Was this Paolini's moment, Eala's missed opportunity, or Federer's quiet reminder that some legends never really leave the court, they just watch from a different seat? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if stories like this keep pulling you in, hit subscribe because women's tennis is delivering drama you won't want to miss.